Story 1. When we had just started dating, my husband kept canceling or rescheduling dates to go visit his sick friend in the hospital. It turns out the friend was real, not a made-up excuse, and had emergency brain surgery to relieve fluid buildup and pressure. He didn't have somewhere he could recover with help available, so my husband put him up in his little condo. When the tests came back that it was terminal brain cancer, he let him stay rent-free so that his disability payments would be enough to enjoy life without stressing about finances or pressure to return to work too early, and there would be someone there to help him if needed. When we had a brief period where we thought maybe he'd live longer and he went back to work full-time, the original tumor was actually seemingly defeated, but then a few months later 2 new ones formed. My husband asked him to pay a small rent and was secretly keeping it in an account to give back to him to help get him started if or when he could move out. My husband rearranged his 1-bedroom condo to make a permanent space in the living room so his friend could stay there and the space was still usable. I was amazed by his kindness, and it spoke volumes about what kind of person he was and how he would handle difficult situations. For those that are wondering, we all became great friends and had fun hanging out in that condo together. But sadly, our friend passed away after about 2 years. However, he didn't have to worry about money or care, and he was happy for the time he had left. He said he didn't have a bucket list and just wanted to enjoy life with his friends and family, and he got to do that while staying out of palliative care for as long as possible. I really wish he could have seen us get married, but we dressed up the cardboard box with our portion of his ashes in a little custom box-sized suit that matched my husband's, put googly eyes on it, and it sat at the head table between us. Story 2. My partner shifted my mom to our house during the COVID days. My mom was severely ill with COVID-19, and he chose to take care of her rather than move her to a hospital for isolation. We couldn't keep her with my dad since he has a lot of comorbidities and low immunity. He did not fear getting infected by her and took care of her day and night like his own mother. He used to lift her and take her to the washroom as she was very weak and recovering from low oxygen. Story 3. Said we need to buy a house big enough for my grandmother to live with us instead of her living in a retirement home. Then he found the house and remodeled the first floor to include a 1-bedroom apartment for her. She lived with us for 15 years and died at home with her family around her. Now my dad lives with us in that apartment, and it is the best thing ever. My husband is a rock star. Story 4. He's now my husband, but before, when we were close friends, we had a connection that I thought was one-sided and never told him about. Anyway, I went through a very difficult situation and opened up to him. I ended up sleeping over and cried periodically throughout the night, and he would wake up and comfort me. I basically wanted to give up, but he came up with solutions and helped me get in contact with someone who assisted me in turning things around. He was just there for me throughout the years in so many different ways. We were friends for 6 years before we got together, and I've seen him change a lot. He had his own struggles. He went to therapy and sorted himself out. He shows up for me every day, and I do the same. I lost my job not long ago and am in a bit of a rut. So this morning as he was getting ready to leave, he made me a coffee in my travel mug and told me to get ready so I could walk him to the subway station. Sunny out, and it's his way of getting me up and out and started with my day. I told him I wanted to paint this morning, and he tried to make sure I would. I love him so much. Story 5. We had just gotten in my car when it was snowy and very icy outside. He saw a woman we vaguely know who is nearly blind and has developmental issues trying to cross the road at a very dangerous spot. He leapt out of the car to help her and walked her home to make sure she was safe. He also offers to help anyone who looks like they are struggling with anything. He is a keeper. Story 6. I had a pretty severe injury that I tried to downplay for years. Sometimes when my ex-partner was asleep, I would sneak out and sleep on our cheap couch when I was in pain because it was a bit more comfortable. One night I did this, and as I was making up the couch, she just walked in with the blanket from the bed and lay down on the short part of the sectional, so we were head to head, and went to sleep without saying anything. That relationship ended up blowing up in my face, but for a few years we were really in love, and I hope everyone gets a chance to feel that kind of love. Story 7. Stopped teaching yoga, went and got her general educational development at age 31, enrolled in community college, transferred to university, graduated at 7 months pregnant, took a year off to be with our daughter, got accepted to graduate school, got her master's, brought in a second income for our family. Together 20 years next year. I'll never stop being impressed. Story 8. Yesterday, I told my partner that during a doctor visit I had scheduled to discuss new symptoms. The doctor felt something in my abdomen and sent me to have same-day imaging done. My husband replied, "I'm sorry, that must be rough. I'm thinking of strengthening my core during workouts. I think it'll make my squats better." This morning, when I brought up how that hurt my feelings, he argued why he thought I didn't want to talk about it and not once tried to console me or make it up to me. So probably that. Story 9. When we were less than a year into dating, he invited me to his brother's wedding. His half-brother, whom I had never met, proceeded to be combative and antagonistic with me about everything, frequently looking me up and down, lingering on my cleavage. I've always been a fighter with difficult men, so I gave the half-brother a piece of my mind over lunch. We walked back to our hotel, but I was so uncomfortable at one point that I was shaking while we were getting ready for the actual ceremony. My partner, furious, called his family and threatened to leave the wedding right then and there. I still remember him pacing around the bathroom, in just shoes and the nice pants from the suit we picked out together, interrupting his mom to say, "No, you need to listen to me. No talking. No excuses." Throughout the entire wedding, he was my shield against his half-brother, and we left promptly the next day after lunch. No one, not even my biological dad, had stood up for me with their own family before. I was always told I had to just deal with it or, well, their family. But he knew exactly how uncomfortable I was and didn't question me at all. He said once he saw the behavior, he couldn't unsee it and it just disgusted him. My partner refuses to ever see his half-brother again and has been deeply protective of me with his family since. I still think about that a lot. Story 10. During the later stages of COVID, he was working 15-hour shifts for the National Health Service. I was in India, he was in the United Kingdom, so there was a bit of a time zone difference, and the only time we could talk was during his 1.5-hour-long commute back home. During one such call, I saw him quietly get up from his seat and give it up for an aged man and smile at him. It was a small gesture. He didn't realize I saw him, but it still told me the type of person he was. He's the type of person who would work 15-hour shifts and do home visits for elderly patients during COVID, who would give up his seat for a stranger with a smile, who would stand out in the snow to get a better signal to talk to me for 5 extra minutes. I love him. Story 11. What hammered it into my head that I loved him? My now partner came over and carried my beloved 75-pound-old collie up and down the stairs to my condo twice a day to toilet for months, insisted on driving us to that awful appointment with the veterinarian, stayed with me during euthanasia and actually was tearful as an emotionally avoidant man, and collected his ashes as he knew it would be horrendous for me. Then he spent weeks sitting on the floor getting my new rescue to not be afraid of him. I am a very lucky woman. Believe me, I know it. Story 12. Called me a narcissist for not messaging or calling her back during my aunt's funeral. Also, when my aunt died, she had a meltdown because I might miss her birthday. It's like a switch turned off that could never be turned back on. And from that moment, I knew it was over. Story 13. Said that Hitler was right for killing disabled people because, in the wild, animals will kill their young if they can't survive and are born with birth defects. By the way, I am disabled. Story 14. Saying he was an alcoholic, but it was okay because he wasn't an angry alcoholic. He told me over the next couple of months that he had raped his first ex-wife after the divorce. He then admitted to starting the fire that burned his and his second ex-wife's home down on purpose. But not an angry alcoholic? Sounds like rage and anger and bitterness to me. But have another brandy, sir. It's totally fine. Story 15. I was in an international long-distance relationship, and my boyfriend at the time was flying to the United States to see me. I was very ill with a chronic illness and urgently had to be sent to the hospital. He was still in his own country about to get on a flight, so I called him and told him that I was likely going to be in the hospital all week. I mentioned that if he didn't want to come, it was okay and I'd understand. He came anyway and spent the whole week with me in the hospital. He didn't complain once. He brought my books and laptop to me every day and spent hours just sitting next to me playing Mario Kart on my Switch. This was 2022, and we got married a month ago. Story 16. It's not as drastic as the rest, but my partner, now husband, knew I was having a bad day. I told him I just wanted mashed potatoes. He stopped and got 3 sides of it at the Cheesecake Factory and a slice of cheesecake as dessert on his way home from work. It was small, but showed me he was really invested in taking care of my wants, not just my needs. Story 17. How cruelly he treated me when he was in pain after surgery. I stayed married to him for 8 more years, but I still vividly remember going to take a shower to escape him, standing in the shower and feeling part of my love die. Story 18. I was trapped in an abuse cycle with a terrible man. He was a violent alcoholic, but when it is what you know, you keep going back again and again. Those who haven't been through it won't understand it. Those of you who have will nod in unison. Following a couple of years of calling the police on him for domestic violence and returning back to the same spot because he promised change, I found out that he had one whole long-term girlfriend in a different country. He frequently flew to that country for work and stayed for long periods, and I thought nothing of it. He often had insomnia at my house and would stay awake, but he was actually video chatting with her. I was up late with him one night, and she called. I was relieved that I had a way out. I promised that I'd attend a wedding with him the next day, which I did, and I woke up in the hospital with a traumatic brain injury. He said he had to stick around to take care of me, which was mostly him ignoring me unless he was in the mood. I eventually had to kick him out via the police when his advances and my brain injury turned into my black eye. I moved out of the city. He came to visit me once. He sat on my sofa, hugging me and crying. I looked down and his feet were curled into a prawn shape. I was absolutely disgusted by his weird feet and couldn't stop focusing on just how abhorrent they were. It was like a light switched off. I felt absolutely nothing. He left, I blocked him, and I never spoke to him again. Too long. Didn't read. After years of abuse and manipulation, and attempted murder by a violent alcoholic, I finally broke free when I was disgusted by his strange feet. Story 19. My partner stayed up with me when I was crying and having a rough night emotionally. He didn't have to do that by any means, but stayed up until I was okay again. Showed me just how selfless he is. He sacrificed his own sleep just to make sure I was all right. Story 20. Wanted to say getting strangled unconscious, but I guess not, because we later got back together. I think it was this incident a year later. A big ovarian cyst gave me abdominal hemorrhaging and needed to be operated on, but blood work moved my operation by a week. Had a 40°C fever from an influenza A virus infection. He demanded I split and share my antivirals with him until he got a prescription too. Said he was feeling an itch in his throat all of a sudden. At home, I needed help with tasks like walking the dog. The -20°C weather outside hurt to breathe. While arguing about how he didn't want to help, he said I must not be so sick if I have the energy to get this angry. Tried kicking him out, he grabbed me by my arm. Seething, I threatened with police, and that was it. I reached some kind of boiling point, figuratively and literally. Story 21. At our wedding, he told everyone how great it was that he had paid for the whole thing. He hadn't. My parents did. He didn't contribute a penny. It was extremely embarrassing when one of his friends remarked to my mom how nice it was for my ex to pay. My mom didn't correct him, as that's not her style, but it put into perspective all of the small lies I'd watched him tell to bolster his ego. The marriage didn't last long because I realized I just didn't like him as a person. Story 22. We had been together for maybe a month at that point. I told him that my last relationship was bad, but I didn't say just how bad it was. When we were at his place, I spilled a glass of water and had a breakdown because I was so afraid he was going to react like my ex used to. I was shaking and crying and couldn't even speak. Mind you, this man didn't know just how bad my last relationship was, and for him, I was having a breakdown over a spilled glass of water. He didn't know what was wrong with me, couldn't make it stop, but he held me. He held me and hugged me for hours while I cried and shook. After it passed, I gave him a more thorough summary of my last relationship, and he helped me get better and stood by me every single step of the way. I love him so much. Story 23. The man who always criticized members of his own family for being physically abusive to their wives. But when I was talking about how significant it was that he got violent with me while drinking and needed to take it seriously, he told me, I don't know, I think it happens more than people realize, and it's not that big of a deal.